Guess I can share the feed on LinkedIn too.
Hello, everyone. So we are with Bosham Shaw Immigration Law Group. My name is Haley. We had a bit of a technical error, so that's why we are a little bit late today, but thank you for joining us. So I'm Haley Pickard. I'm the Director of Client Relations and Development. Today we are hosting a Facebook Live and immigration webinar on how immigration law can affect family matters. So I have with me today Ketan Soni, who is the partner at Soni Brendle. Ketan has been, I'm sorry, Soni Brendle is a family law firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. Ketan has been a Charlotte family lawyer and mediator with 20 years of experience. I also have with me today Allison Lukanich. She is an immigration attorney with Bosham Shaw. Allison handles our family immigration cases, and she is a board certified specialist in immigration for the state of North Carolina. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you guys for bearing with me. I know we had a little bit of an issue earlier. So Ketan, you were talking a little bit. So tell us a little bit about Soni Brendle and how you came into family law.
Okay, so I started my career in family law 20 years ago with a large law firm, a divorce-only law firm in Raleigh, actually. And that's how I met Morali. And him and I have been colleagues ever since. But at that firm, I got the opportunity to represent a lot of folks going through divorce, but who also had immigration-related issues. As you all know, there's Research Triangle Park and a bunch of tech companies and a bunch of uh, pharma companies and all that kind of stuff. And those employees are rife with immigration issues sometimes, but also divorce as well. So whenever I had an issue that delved into the immigration realm, I'd just pick up the phone. Morali would send me off to one of his associates and say, "Look, I do the corporate stuff. Let me get you to one of my family folks," and we would work together to find out a good solution. About 10 years after I started, I moved to Charlotte to open up a branch office of that same large law firm. Worked there for a little bit, and then joined a couple of friends of mine. And ultimately, about 6 months ago, I started my own practice because it's changed over time. So what I do now is a lot of mediation stuff, which means I'm helping other people resolve their cases when two people can't talk to each other anymore. And I still run into those immigration issues, but the nice thing is it's all problem solving, right? So it's not me representing those folks, but it's me helping them figure out a solution, hopefully, that makes sure everyone stays in the country properly, that they're getting their certifications or visas or whatever they need, but also being proactive about making sure the government doesn't think something improper is happening. So I often call up people like Allison and Morali to make sure I'm doing things the right way. So that's a little bit of my background and history. How about from your end, Allison?
So I have been with the firm just shy of 4 years. I have practiced immigration law just about 8 years now, which is crazy to think it's been that long. And I have always wanted to practice immigration law and kind of have found my practice in both family immigration, so marriages, naturalizations, and then also kind of the humanitarian side of immigration, so different types of humanitarian visas, deportation defense, all of that, which has kept me pretty busy the last couple of years. So I, of course, always, because a lot of what I do is marriage-based immigration, so when a U.S. citizen marries an immigrant spouse, always have a lot of family law questions. So I'm so glad that we're doing this today, because a lot of times I do have to defer out and I'm not sure, just go meet with someone. You got to meet with a family law attorney here. So it's great that we're doing this today to kind of spread some knowledge across both of our client bases.
Yeah, I was going to say, I completely agree. I feel like there's so much overlap, especially kind of in what you do, Allison, between family law and immigration law. So I really am glad we're getting together today. To delve in and kind of just to start off, I thought of a few questions, so I just kind of want to go through, but also talk about it with you guys. So legal separation in North Carolina and divorce in North Carolina. So I know that there might not be legal separation in North Carolina. I know a very brief bit about it, but from a family, I kind of want to get a family law perspective on it and an immigration law perspective on it, just kind of how divorce in North Carolina works.
Okay, so you're right. There's no such thing as legal separation, the term legal separation in North Carolina. It does exist in other states, and what it really means here is if you're no longer living with your spouse in the same residence, that's all you need to be separated in North Carolina. So there's no paperwork that needs to be signed. There's no official declaration. And that's either voluntarily someone moves out of the house or apartment, or there's some kind of order that's forced someone out of the residence. It doesn't count, and I get this a lot. It doesn't count when you say, "Hey, I'm just going to move up to the upstairs in a separate bedroom." It has to be two physically separate residences, and so that's the first thing that you need in order to start a separation in North Carolina. That's at least from the family law perspective. How about what does it mean from the immigration perspective?
Well, it kind of depends on what immigration question we have. So in a marriage-based immigration case, which again, you have typically a US citizen or a green card holder petitioning their immigrant spouse, any sort of separation or moving towards a divorce could obviously throw a big, kind of hammer in the process. For immigration purposes, a marriage needs to be legitimate, meaning not solely for the purposes of an immigration benefit. So sometimes even when a spouse is going through the immigration process, but being, separated and moving towards a divorce, they can still move forward in an immigration case so long as they demonstrate that from the onset of their marriage and up until the point where they decided to separate and kind of move apart from one another, it was still a legitimate marriage, again, and not for that fraudulent purpose of just wanting like what you would think of as kind of a quote unquote green card marriage. Of course, it can mean a couple different things if we're talking about people here on temporary work visas, and then they have a dependent spouse that is tied into that job offer, that employment situation, can get a little bit tricky in that context.
What's amazing is, but not all the time, but a lot of times when I get a consult on the family law realm, the person, and there's immigration issues involved, the person will ask me, how do I make sure, is this going to impact my spouse's residency here? Is it going to impact their status? And they mean it in a positive way, meaning how do I make sure it doesn't impact that? I don't want to screw them over, but rather I just want to make sure that I don't want to be in this relationship anymore, but I want to make sure they're preserved, which is a great sentiment to feel. Now, that's not always the case. I'd say a good 80% of the time, that's what people ask me. And of course, that's when I pick up the phone and call you. But it's actually nice to hear that, not everyone is trying to hose the other side over all the time.
Yeah, and I think that people get really nervous if a marriage isn't working out well, and the immigrant spouse specifically gets in that feeling, well, I have to stay with this person because if I don't, I'm going to be deported, or and that's not the case at all. There are a lot of protections in place for people who entered marriages for the reason that all of us enter into marriage, for the purpose of living a life together with someone. And it doesn't always end up that way. And there are, within our immigration system, there are protections in place for those spouses. And sometimes they just need to be empowered and they just need that information. And it's great to hear. Unfortunately, sometimes I get calls on the other end, which is, oh my God, my spouse was cheating on me and I just want to get her deported. What do I need to do? And my answer is, well, I work for immigrants. I do not work for the government. I don't work in that realm, so I can't help you. But it is refreshing to hear that you have kind of 80% the opposite experience, where again, it's irreconcilable differences, however you want to word it. Things just don't work out, but that doesn't mean they want to send the person out of the country.
Yeah. What does the job thing look like for spouses of immigrants who are here on a work visa? Because that's a common question and problem I run into.
It depends. In most circumstances, if you are a dependent spouse here on like a student visa, so your spouse is attending school, you're not entitled to employment authorization. If a common in the tech field is H-1B, here in the RTP area, and only in a very narrow, limited circumstances are H-4 dependents, which are spouses of H-1B holders, entitled to employment authorization. So a lot of times they're able to be here, they're in lawful status. They're not undocumented, they're not illegal, but they really can't work. And I imagine that it would become difficult then in the event of a separation, because again, in North Carolina, you must be separated for a year before you can file for divorce. So maintaining separate households, but a lot of times that dependent spouse is not able to work and start earning their own income. And it can cause a lot of issues from an immigration side.
What options do those folks have? Is there a process by which they can become approved to work, or is it just kind of up in the air these days, given the changes in the laws?
So again, it does depend on what their spouse's underlying status is, but if it's not one that lends itself to employment authorization, unfortunately, there's really no, oh, by the way, my spouse is divorcing me, I need help, because from the federal government's perspective, well, you can just go home to your home country, you're here on a temporary visa anyway. So the system is a little harsh in that setting. And like I said, there is the potential for some abuse where a dependent spouse feels trapped to stay in a marriage where they're not happy and maybe things aren't going well because their options from an immigration standpoint are so limited. And then of course you get into where there is a separation that takes place, but the main immigrant spouse will hold back paperwork so they can't renew their visas or they can't. So it can kind of become a very, one-sided scenario where, family law attorneys are really necessary and mediators are necessary to kind of help both sides just work through the process.
Mhm.
So a question I actually have for you, Ketan, about that, in the mediation, or if it goes to, it goes beyond mediation, can a court order compel either the petitioner, so that either the U.S. citizen or the main beneficiary of an immigrant visa or a non-immigrant visa, work visa, to turn over documentation to support their dependent spouse from immigration status?
Yeah, so kind of. And before I get into that, I want to add one thing to what you said a little bit earlier. You're right that the parties have to be separated for a year in order to get a divorce. But in the middle of that year, and this goes into your question, in the middle of that year, you can file for things like spousal support and division of assets and debts and things of that nature. And so that's where that dependent spouse can really get some support in the interim, which is if they're here legally, documented, meaning, and there's no threat of deportation, they can get spousal support from the working spouse. And so that can happen immediately. Or so, for instance, let's say we can't agree, someone can file something here or in Wake County, and usually within 45 days or so, maybe pre-COVID, before 45 days or so, you can get in front of a court and say, here's a temporary Band-Aid on support amounts to the other spouse. And so, yeah, that can definitely happen in order to protect someone from being essentially homeless or moneyless or penniless in a bad situation. And so oftentimes we're trying to work out temporary issues like that. The court system is great if no one wants to agree, but most people want to reach some kind of agreement. And so folks usually work towards something like that in the interim.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's that 80% of the time. In those 20% cases, it's much more difficult. And I think and we'll probably get to this, but where it gets much, much, much more difficult is when you have children involved, because that's when that situation of someone being forced to make a choice of staying in this country without the opportunity to get a job versus going back to their home country means what happens with the kids, right? There's no correct answer to that, but that is a dangerous situation for everybody involved.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think you bring up a good point and kind of a good question. So, if someone, I feel like this might be multiple questions, but I'm interested. So if someone is just a dependent off of someone's visa holder and they want to take their child back to, their home country, do they need, I know that for US citizen children, it's a little bit different. They need authorization or some kind of written statement from one parent saying that the other parent can take the child outside of the US. Is that the same for someone who's just a visa holder and if their child is just a visa holder?
It's not the same. It's easier to leave the country if you're not a citizen. So let's talk about some tools for everyone who's listening, right? One of the biggest tools that I found, and Allison, I want your input too, is travel.state.gov. There's a way you can register travel to prevent people, or to be notified actually, in the event that a child is being put on a plane. And so that's one of the first resources in those situations where I hear that maybe mom or dad is about to abscond from the country with the child. Allison, how about from the immigration side of things?
So, my personal experience with this issue as an attorney, unfortunately, I'm typically not consulted until after the fact, where partners, maybe they were never married, but they have a U.S. citizen child in common, and one of the partners is undocumented, so can't leave the country because if he or she were to leave, can't get back in. Agrees to, oh yeah, you can take our child to visit or on vacation or visit, grandparents in home country, and unfortunately then they leave the child there, and they may come back, the other partner may come back, but they leave the child there in the custody or care of their own relatives. And again, it can become a very difficult situation where these people are powerless. They can't go back and ask, and take the child back. Whether or not that rises to the level of kidnapping may depend on the law of the country in place, because the child did leave the US with permission. And it becomes, really difficult from a jurisdictional standpoint. The longer the child is out of the country, then you may have to fight the case down there as opposed to here. So I always advise my clients, get something in right. Even if this is the easiest ex-partner in terms of working with custody, you're always in agreement, get it in writing, get it filed with the court, consult a family lawyer, because you just don't want to do, because after the fact, it's so much more expensive and so much more of a heartache to not even be able to see your child, let alone, sometimes, they can withhold FaceTime or, talking with them. So it's planning ahead is really, really crucial in these scenarios. And I say, even for the best scenario you have with this ex-partner, I deal with a lot. So I am bilingual, I speak Spanish. So I have a lot of clients in Latin America, different type of machismo culture. We also have high incidences of undocumented individuals in that community in the US. So I've seen it a lot of times, just the power between a US citizen man who is of Latino origin, kind of taking it, of the same country from the undocumented partner, taking that child back, and then that child being stuck until they're 18. Because once they're 18, they can get their own passport renewed and come back. But losing those years, I mean, it's just devastating. And it's a really challenging process to some of these women that I've dealt with. So I, try to do as much education as I can and letting them know their options, referring it out, and letting them know the value of getting these orders in place prior to a trip like that. But sometimes it's just a difficult situation.
Let's touch on that briefly, if I can add a couple things. So the I think you're 100% right, and the challenge, to be very blunt about it, is you may not see your kid again until they're of age, meaning 18. And so the reason for that is, even though we have a global society, international travel, and all this kind of stuff, not everyone has agreed to follow each other's laws, right? So there's something called the Hague Convention that has some protection for some countries, but only those who have ascribed to it. And even in those Hague Convention countries, it is not easy to get the relief that you're seeking. And so a couple examples. So one of them, this is years ago, back when I was in Raleigh, it was a mom had absconded from Hungary to here. And I took this case pro bono, and it's a Hague Convention case, international child abduction. And that in that case, the mom had been here for a year and a half before the dad could even, number one, find her, but then number two, get any kind of jurisdiction initiated. And then the third part of that was the judge who was on that case wasn't terribly versed or willing to become versed on how it all worked. And his view was, well, the kid's been here for a year and a half, so what? What are we talking about here? Dad can just come from Hungary anytime he wants. It's like, no, that's not how it works, dude. Judge. So it's very difficult depending on where you're going. And so from a parent leaving the U.S. with their child to say India, also not, there's no guarantee that you're going to see your child again. Like, you might have to go to India, and quite frankly, from what I know about India, that parent can cause additional problems. I mean, the parent who left to India can cause additional problems for the parent coming to India, both from a financial perspective, from a criminal charges perspective. And so Allison is 100% right. You can do whatever you want, but you should consult with someone before you let these big trips happen for children for long periods of time.
Yeah,
So
that was going to be my question, is if there was really any legal recourse for someone. And it kind of sounds like no, if they're a visa holder, their spouse is a visa holder, their child is a visa holder, it really, there's nothing in the US court systems for a legal recourse for them. Is that correct?
there is recourse. It just takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, and there's no guarantee. So I'll give you another brief example. So Mexico, for instance, service of process in Mexico is 18 months to 2 years probably.
Wow.
And so, and that's because you got to translate documents, you got to send stuff to the central authority, you got to wait for a response, and then service is not, hey, well, I was going to say the post office, but forget that for a minute. I was going to say, service might, it's not FedEx,
Yeah.
right? In other countries, uh, pursuant to this Hague thing, there's limited ways in which you can serve people. And so one of them, when I got Mexico service, it was a 46-page document, and the person doing the service hand wrote all the places, all the houses that they walked to find this person and finally serve them. So it is time consuming, it is expensive, it is not an easy hurdle to overcome. So yes, there is recourse, but don't expect it to be overnight, or maybe even within 6 months or a year. And that's a long time to go without seeing your kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And I've, in certain cases, I've had to involve the U.S. embassies of these countries to try to get them involved, the FBI, and in the event of kidnapping. And unfortunately, they've taken the stance in some of these. In one case in particular, this was a Guatemalan woman, and her child was a U.S. citizen. He was born here. So, kind of the scenario I described. And the embassy took the stance, well, jurisdiction vests with Guatemala because he's been in Guatemala for 18 months now. Why didn't you call us when the dad didn't put him back on that first flight? And I asked the woman that because that was their attitude, and she said, well, he kept saying he was going to bring him back, and then this happened, and then he wanted to try a year of school to work on his Spanish, and then this, and it just broke my heart. But to some, the longer you let these things go on, the lesser, because the embassy, who's there to protect U.S. citizens and there to help, but again, they only have so much authority when they're in a foreign country, and they have to follow the laws of that country as well. So like I said, planning ahead is, from my perspective, really key.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I wanted to kind of highlight back on, this is a question I have, and just kind of get clarity on it. So Allison, you had mentioned this, and Ketan, I wanted to check with you. So the getting things in writing, and you had mentioned, Allison, getting it registered with the court. So is that aspect of it required for it to be kind of a legally binding item between the two parents if one takes them outside of the US? Does it have to be registered with the court, or can they just have that piece of paper signed by both people, possibly notarized, or does it have to be registered with the court?
So it's a complex question here. So I'll give you 30,000-foot view answers, right? Having anything signed is better than nothing, first of all. Having something with the court system would be great, but it's also not automatically going to protect you. A piece of paper, right? This piece of notepad is not going to protect me at all from anything coming my way, but it's at least something, right? And so, yeah, if you can get a court order, great, but it's not cheap. If you can get something in writing saying, yes, I'm coming back in 3 weeks, here's my ticket, return ticket, and ticket going out, and here's my general itinerary, awesome. But even with those things, depending on where you're going, it may not ultimately make a difference. So you may need to check in with resources in the country that you're going to, or the family's going to see what's available there. You may want to have family members, I'm picking on India for a second, have family members on India, say, hey, let's keep our eyes on where the kids are, or something of that nature. So do as much as you can, but I guess, the way I would say it is, if there's something in your gut that feels weird, it's time to talk to someone to make sure you're not going to be in a bad place.
Okay. So
don't go with your gut.
Okay. So definitely if someone is, kind of like you were saying, feeling, my spouse, my ex-spouse, my estranged spouse is taking our child to the US, I'm just feeling weird, you would definitely encourage them to talk to a family law attorney.
Yeah, and absolutely. And on top of that, you should know that judges encourage international travel. So you could say, I have a bad feeling in my gut, and the judge says, well, where are they going? Germany. It's like, well, sorry, And the problem when you get to Germany, right, is you can go somewhere else from Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there's no easy answer, but just at least listen to your gut if you think something's weird.
Okay. And so, Allison, you had done a video recently. It's probably a month or two back. We had discussed options for those who have suffered domestic violence. We discussed VAWA and the divorce waiver for the conditional residency. So, Ketan, I wanted to get your perspective on how domestic violence is handled in the family law courts.
Yeah, it's a hotly contested issue. There's been allegations by people that are made that are not truthful, and it's used to obtain immigration status.
Hmm.
There's
Mm.
completely valid domestic violence allegations made all the time. It is a mess to sort through. It is difficult. It is challenging. There's no right answer. It's a case by case thing, meaning from a figuring out if someone's being honest or not. I always try to knee jerk reaction on, hey, I'm going to believe you and everything you say until I feel that something's not correct. But I've been in those situations where, not it's a little different now than it was 2 years ago, but even 2 years ago, I had to defend against a case where, the parties were married, I think, less than a month,
Oh, wow.
and they had never lived in a residence together. They lived like in a hotel or something because they just got married. And then the wife without telling the husband, moved to Jersey, filed a domestic violence action up there,
Hmm.
and then use that as leverage to try to get her immigration status approved, like her green card, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went through, I'm not kidding you, a $50,000 battle over a 1 month marriage on that issue alone, because that guy, like my guy, was not going to be taken advantage of. And I don't blame him. And he was proven to be vindicated. Like all the criminal charges were dismissed. It was shown that she had been communicating with people in India about how to get a visa and all the different methodologies well before the marriage. But that kind of thing does happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so does domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
Like people are abused, people are hit emotionally abused, they're physically abused. It's very difficult and sensitive. I mean, we have to keep our eyes and ears open as practitioners, but it does happen. It can be used it can and has been used in a negative way in the immigration side of things. So, and I think, Allison, this is, I want to hear your perspective. I think folks hear that they can use domestic violence and they don't really delve into the fact that maybe they can be here anyway. Maybe it's okay for them to not have a work visa, but they can still be here. It's not like they're getting deported, but they freak out and they try to latch on to something that ends up causing a lot more harm than good. Because if you think about it, let's pretend for a moment that the allegation was false. Well, now you've also jeopardized the person's work visa who's here as well, right? But of course, let's say it's true, then we want to make sure that person is protected properly. So,
Right. I think it's a double-edged sword because we have to believe, victims, and we have to believe. And I think I have noticed, representing from all sorts of, I've represented clients on 6 continents, and culturally you have to be sensitive to marriages in different continents mean something different, and also culturally the thought of being undocumented means a lot worse in certain cultures than it does in others, where within the Hispanic culture, within the Hispanic, Latin culture here, there's a lot of people that are undocumented in the US that come across the border for better economic opportunities, fleeing violence in their home countries. And that's really not looked down on. It's really, it's you did what you had to do to get into this country. Whereas in other cultures, it's something of shame that the visa didn't work out or the job didn't work out. And it doesn't need to be something of shame. And I do agree with you that in certain circumstances, I can see why someone may make those allegations, because the alternative thought of having to be undocumented being so shameful, but then they're committing fraud, and that's going to cause a whole lot of other issues, not just to themselves, but possibly their ex-partner. But what I will say to that point also is just filing a protective order or even filing criminal charges and allegations of domestic violence are not going to be enough to give protection to that individual. Any sort of visa or status that someone could qualify for on the basis of being in a violent relationship, there's a couple options. There's a U visa for victims of crime, including domestic violence. And that would be if your spouse that committed violence against you was here on a temporary visa as well. There's VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, which is when you're married to a US citizen or green card holder. And that's where they sometimes will use their status to control you, to, and it's not just violent, but extreme cruelty. So where they're making you do all the housework and holding that against you. But regardless of how you may qualify for status, you have to document it. And it's not enough to show up with a protective order in your hand or proof that charges were filed. You need, evidence of it. I mean, proof of text messages, letters from family or friends. And those are things that, I believe in our immigration system. And I believe that even though right now, maybe it's not the best, the way that certain things are being interpreted, but there is a level of vetting, there is a level of reviewing of evidence. And again, just filing a protective order that was signed by, like an ex parte protective order, anyone can get those, is not going to be enough. And you're going to get additional requests for evidence. And if you can't back it up and show this history and this cycle of abuse that you've suffered, the case is going to get denied anyways. So again, are there people that do try to take advantage? I'm sure there absolutely are. I thankfully have not encountered that or not suspected a client of that, and I wouldn't have represented someone if I did suspect that. But what I see on my end is a lot more, especially because you brought up like in the Indian community, there can be, from what I've seen, shame associated with the thought of being undocumented, and as well as fear. Where I have seen some women, it is a culture of arranged marriage. Some women feeling like they have no choice but to stay in that relationship that is abusive, because of the shame of either being undocumented or kind of separating and divorcing, which is a huge no in that culture. So I personally, I enjoyed empowering these, typically it is women. It's not always, but I do enjoy the aspect of my job that allows me to empower these women to understand their rights, to understand what options they have. And in a lot of scenarios, they do get to stay here and become independent and support their children. And that's a great, when the system works in that favor is a wonderful thing.
There's some resources locally, like here up in the RTP area. There's some resources down here. So if you're listening and you need some help and you're in a domestic violence situation, please let us know so we can point you in the right direction. And just to piggyback on what you said, domestic violence is a real issue. It does occur all the time, all too often, and so it does need proper attention, especially whether it's immigration, family law, or just generally. So let us know if you need some resources. We're happy to at least get you in the right direction.
Yes, thank you, Ketan. I appreciate that for adding that in. That is very true. So, I wanted to round this out, kind of get both of your perspectives. Learning more about what you've done, Ketan. I don't know if I'm asking the question correctly, but I kind of wanted to get your perspective on what is it like to litigate in the North Carolina courts. I know you do maybe more mediation, but both litigation and mediation. And then the same for you, Allison, in immigration courts, what it's like to litigate.
So litigation in family law, when I started this 20 years ago in the Wake County area, it was fine. Meaning sometimes you can't resolve cases and you need someone to call balls and strikes. I feel like it's become increasingly more litigious as time has gone on. I feel like it's becoming increasingly more costly. And I feel like even if COVID is an example, right, the ability of the court system to effectively handle disputes is lacking. And that's partially because of funding or for various reasons, right? And so I feel like it's not the best. Obviously, I feel like it's not the best place to be. It is a great place for to put a lot of money down the drain and maybe not get the result that you're looking for. You certainly could get the result, but it's going to take time and money. So people are turning towards arbitration and lots of So arbitration means you hire someone who's skilled in that particular practice area to make a decision for you. instead of relying upon elected judges. Nothing wrong with those people, but just experience level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mediation, which is what I do, a lot of dispute resolution alternatives. And so that's where I think things are going, especially the other thing I see a lot is more unrepresented parties, right? Non pro se, so no lawyer involved, and they just say, I can't afford a lawyer or it doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to do myself. And so as information increases out there and access to justice hopefully increases out there, we're going to see more of that kind of stuff too. So that's not really answering your question directly, except to say stay out of litigation if you're in a position to do so. Don't settle it on horrible terms, but make compromises to help you move forward, because there's a lot more to focus on life than just being in the court system for 18 months or longer. So that's my biased opinion and answer to your question.
Thank you.
Well, and I was hoping you weren't going to ask me this question. Litigation in the immigration context is not something you ever want to be dealing with because it is the deportation context. So if you're litigating a case, it's because you're being deported, I should say you are in deportation proceedings. It is absolutely a stacked deck. So our immigration, we call it an immigration court, but it's an administrative court. So that you have a judge who is a representative of the Department of Justice, DOJ, part of the executive branch, and you have the prosecutor is an attorney for ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and they're part of DHS, Department of Homeland Security, which is also part of the executive branch. So it really is a stacked deck, especially in this very anti-immigrant administration we're in right now. Lots of new judges are being appointed. They typically basically get promoted from the ICE side of things, and they're just promoted up, or they're pulled, they're JAG attorneys, so they're working in DOD. They already have high levels of security clearance, but very few immigration judges come from the private sector. Most of them come from, like I said, either the JAG Corps, they're attorneys for the military, or they are ICE attorneys. So it's very difficult. However, that being said, the courts are incredibly backlogged right now. Our court, immigration court in all of the Carolinas, North and South Carolina, is in Charlotte. So if you're in removal proceedings, deportation proceedings, you have court in Charlotte. They have been closed since mid-March, and just got an email this morning. They're not set to reopen until September 14th. And every Monday I get a new email that pushes them back another week. So I've had about 7 or 8 trials from March onward that have been pushed back into 2024 and 2025, believe it or not. So it's, I say some clients, it's a blessing because they don't have a strong case and it buys them time, and they're here, a lot of them with work permits, and they're able to stay and 3 or 4 more or 5 more years down the line and see what happens. Others have strong cases, have relief available, and they just want the case over and done with. And we're kind of powerless to really control anything right now. So immigration litigation right now is very interesting. We'll kind of see what happens come January if we do have a change in administration, but it's very difficult, and it's lack of resources, funding. There's just a lot to it. So like you said, if you can stay out of it, don't, absolutely. I can pass along that sentiment to my clients as well. Don't do something stupid that can risk your status, because you don't want to be in that realm of uncertainty and 4 or 5 years for your case to be concluded.
Allison, let me ask you this. What's your understanding currently about the SIJ visas, the special immigrant juvenile visas? Stop.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So just a little bit of background. So SIJS, Special Immigrant Juvenile Status, is a special visa status available to minor children who were abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents. So it is a great option for kids, the unaccompanied minors that are coming in at the border. Really the last couple of years, they're fleeing, abuse and neglectful situations, or just other children. Sometimes kids come here as a derivative visa, and their parents go back home and leave them here with a relative, and that's an abandonment. So it's a 2-part process where you need a family court order that finds that abuse, abandonment, or neglect, and then if the family court judge finds that, you apply for immigration status. Well, the issue right now is only 10,000 visas can be approved every year. And the vast majority of clients that qualify for these visas are from Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, because we have the highest rates of these unaccompanied minor children. So right now there's about a 4-year backlog. So I have kids that I initiated these cases. We got custody orders for these cases back in 2015, 2016, and we filed the status. So we have a confirmation from immigration confirming they qualify for the status, but they can't file for the green card until there's a visa available. They can't get a work permit. So these kids are now aging out. They're graduating from high school. They're wanting to enter the workforce, and they're being forced to work undocumented because we can't get them a work permit until we can file for their green card. Now, the good news is they're by being forced to work undocumented, it's not going to affect them from green card eligibility, but it's just heartbreaking that it's taking them so long when they become very accomplished, but then they can't go to college because they can't get funding, and they're just kind of everything gets put on hold. And actually two of the trials this summer that got rescheduled were for SIJS kids of mine who finally 4 years later qualify for the green card, and I just can't get the hearing to get them the status. And it's really heartbreaking. And every month the moms call me like, what can we do? Please help. And it's like, till the court reopens. 2 of the trials have been reset for December. So fingers crossed, COVID will be more under control so we can actually go in December and get them the status. But it's a great option. I love the SIJS visa. I love working with these families. I just wish it didn't take so long.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you both. I know that we could go on, and I actually would really love to get more into the custody and SIJS, but kind of leaving off, Ketan and Allison, if you wanted to leave off with a comment before we end today.
Well, thanks for having us, first of all. I appreciate you taking the time to arrange all this. I think the comment is simply there's a lot of nuances when we have the intersection of family law and immigration. So don't be afraid to ask questions, because I ask questions all the time instead of guessing or thinking that I know the right answer. And so pick up the phone, and even if it's a consult or whatever you need to do, don't Google it. It doesn't work. Call Allison or Morali or whoever the heck you got to call. And if you need resources, then feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to point you in the right direction to the degree we can. But please just don't try to, Google is just telling, anyway, don't Google it. That's my advice.
That was honestly almost exactly what I was going to say, that information is really powerful. And some of my favorite consults are the ones where I know this is not going to turn into a case, but I know they just want the information and they want to just give themselves the knowledge to make good decisions moving forward. And that, I think all lawyers just love being able to help people before it gets too late where they then need to hire us and pay thousands of dollars to try to fix something. So if you're watching this and you have any questions whatsoever from an immigration side, give me a call. From a family law side, give Ketan a call. Talk to one of us. We may refer you to the other, depending what the question is. But that's absolutely, I think, the one key takeaway is just empower yourselves, get the information up front, and then you can make good decisions moving forward to protect your status, to protect your family, whatever it may be.
Yes, awesome. So thank you guys so much. We are Bosham Shaw. You can find us at Bosham Shaw Immigration Law Group on Facebook. Ketan, you can find Soni Brendle on Facebook, correct?
It's NC Law Attorneys. So North Carolina Law Attorneys.com. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Or Soni Brendle.
I was like, that's how you can find Soni Brendle. Ketan is the partner, as we said. You can also find him on LinkedIn, Ketan P. Soni, and you can find Allison as well, Allison Lukanich. So thank you both so much. We really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a wonderful week.
Thanks, Haley, for setting this up.
Bye.
Bye.